If you spend enough time online, you've probably scrolled past the viral videos about the so-called "No Tears in Hell" killer. These accounts are often flooded with dramatized horror movie portrayals built entirely on shock value. To understand the actual history of Alexander Spesivtsev, we have to look past the internet myths and focus on the documented reality. The case took place in Novokuznetsk, a Russian city defined by its massive steel and coal operations. It is a dense, industrial landscape where freezing winters and sprawling gray concrete define the daily environment. This is where Alexander Spesivtsev lived with his mother, Ludmila. To their neighbors, they appeared entirely unremarkable, just another quiet family blending into the background of a crowded apartment block. The horror of this case lies in the mechanics of the concealment. An ordinary apartment door successfully hid a slaughterhouse in plain sight for years. Soviet-era residential blocks were engineered for extreme density. Alexander and Ludmila's neighbors slept and ate mere inches away on all sides. Yet despite this proximity, no one reported hearing screams. Behind those paper-thin walls, the apartment maintained an unnatural silence. Understanding how this sanctuary of violence survived for years requires us to examine two distinct layers of complicity: the institutional apathy of the state and the active protection provided by a mother. Alexander's path was marked by a steady escalation of violence. His first major documented offense was the brutal murder of his own girlfriend, a crime that finally brought him into contact with the authorities. Because of his mental state, the legal system did not send him to a prison. Instead, he was committed to a secure psychiatric facility to be restrained and treated by state medical staff. After several years of confinement, the psychiatric board reviewed Alexander's case and officially cleared him for a full release back into society. In signing those discharge papers, medical professionals ignored a long list of documented red flags. They overlooked his continued lack of empathy and his persistent violent impulses, allowing a known threat to walk free. The state system effectively delivered a lethal individual back to the one person who would never turn him in: his mother. Once insulated inside Ludmila's apartment, Alexander's behavior transitioned from impulsive outbursts to a methodical, hidden routine. He began profiling his targets with predatory precision, focusing on runaway youths and transient children, vulnerable people who were unlikely to be reported missing by their families or the police. Alexander used the promise of food and shelter to draw vulnerable targets off the freezing streets and into his apartment. Ludmila acted as the ultimate enabler, managing the neighbors' suspicions and controlling every point of access to the apartment to ensure her son's activities remained shielded from the outside world. This dynamic weaponized the inherent social trust in a mother's protection. By playing the role of a quiet, protective parent, she provided an impenetrable cover for a killer. The years of silence only ended when a single victim managed to escape the apartment. Despite her injuries, she reached the street and alerted the public to what was happening behind the door. Law enforcement intervened immediately, arriving at the snow-covered block and physically breaching the entrance to the Spesivtsev home. Officers initially believed they were responding to a domestic assault. However, once inside, they discovered a staggering scale of physical evidence that proved the apartment had been a site of prolonged systemic violence. The systems designed to protect the public had failed at every turn. In the end, this multi-year reign of terror was only dismantled by the sheer will of the one person who got away. Following the investigation, Alexander was declared legally insane. He was removed from society permanently and returned to a high-security psychiatric ward under strict supervision. Ludmila also faced the court. She was convicted for enabling the crimes and was sentenced to prison for her complicity. A psychological debate remains. Was Ludmila a victim of her son's madness or a willing participant who chose to facilitate his violence? The grim, bureaucratic reality of these court findings is far more unsettling than the flashy myths found online. The history of the Siberian Ripper is a warning about the fragility of our safety nets and the violence that flourishes when neighbors forget to knock on silent doors.